So Raul, today we're talking about board members and board meetings. It's the beginning of the year. A lot of churches are getting started at this beginning and they're formulating their boards. Or a lot of pastors that have been started are trying to figure out how to work with the board they have and what board meetings do they need to have this year. So I thought I'd get you in here and we'd just talk a little bit about board meetings. First off, so let's high center on this. What are board members? What are the board of directors for people that don't know?
Yeah, in essence, if we were to bring it down to the simplest definition, it is the group of people that form a body that governs the affairs of the church. And then you can define that to say board members govern the legal and administrative side, while the pastor and the pastoral staff would govern the spiritual aspects of the church. But at the end of the day, it's the board members who will be responsible for all the legal things that happen. And thankfully, all 50 states have indemnity laws where if board members make decisions and they're documented correctly, board meetings take place and they're documented correctly, then there's indemnity that they can't personally get in trouble for any tax liability that could incur if a mistake is made. But it's super important to document it, because if you don't put it in writing, it never happens.
It's probably why we hear anecdotally all the time say, I want to make sure my legal board is set up right. A lot of times they have good pastors and deacons, but they're saying, can you give us instruction about our legal board? A board insinuates that it's more than one person, so we get the question a lot, how many people should I have on my board? Love to know your recommendation.
Yeah, well, I always recommend it be an odd number so that you never have a tie, right? And to me, the best board is 5 people. Any board above 5 gets too big.
I've heard like 15, 17. I've heard those boards that are like, oh my gosh, it's half the church.
I remember one time a church that was going through our Start Right program had 17 board members, and they had 100 members in their church.
Wow.
You're going to have a really hard time getting anything done.
Sure.
But you need 5 people that are like-minded, that share a common vision, and that do not care about their preferences coming through. They bring their knowledge to the table, but at the end of the day, even if a decision is made and that they disagree with, they still commit wholeheartedly as though it was their own idea.
Yeah.
That to me is a dream board.
Yeah, every board that I sit on, I have to make sure that I am in alignment. That's what I'm always asking myself. Am I in alignment with the vision? Am I willing to put in the time to be there for them? Am I willing to understand clearly the vision of the pastor? And do I bring something to help? As a critical position.
You can't be selfish and be on a board.
No, you got to be serving, right?
That's right. You got to be willing to serve.
What about a question we get a lot is the balance. They hear the term balanced board, and I've heard you talk about before it being more unrelated than related, and more unpaid than paid.
That's correct.
Speaking to that, why is that so important?
Well, that comes straight out of Section 4958 of the Internal Revenue Code, specifically Treasury Regulation 53, in which the IRS defines the definition of a family member when it pertains to the board of directors of a church or a nonprofit. And so the IRS defines it and says that in order for your board to be balanced and to be legally set up correctly to meet the requirements of the regulation, the majority of the members cannot be related by blood or marriage.
Right.
So if you have 5 board members and a husband and wife, such as the pastor and his spouse, or the pastor and her spouse, are on the board, then the next 3 board members cannot be related to each other by blood or marriage or to either of the pastors.
You can't just add another couple, right?
That's right. You can't just add another couple. You got to keep them unrelated by blood or marriage. And then there's another aspect to balancing the board out, is that the majority of the members of the board cannot be salaried individuals, not just salaried to be on the board, but salaried in any other aspect of the organization. So if the pastor is on salary at the church and someone else is on salary at the church that's on the board, you cannot have any more salaried individuals serve on the board. The idea is that in order to best serve a public interest, the majority of the people cannot have an interest in themselves as they serve in the organization.
Sure, they're trying to keep the board focused on the ministry, on the mission, not just what we can do and push through ourselves. I know you, you know me. I'm paid, I pay you, vote my way up.
That's right. But there's also another side to this that is in the regulation, and that is if I am a salaried individual and we're now working on the budget side of the church, and we're going to be setting salaries for all of the other staff members, a salaried board member cannot vote on any other salary at the church. So they have to recuse themselves. So when it comes time to vote, they need to mention to the board and say, hey, I have to recuse myself from voting on salaries because I myself am a salaried member. And specifically, you can't vote on other people's salary, but especially your own salary.
Yeah.
You want to be able to show that a public interest is being served and that you don't take part in anything that could benefit yourself. And some people go, well, that doesn't sound fair. It's my church. I started it. And I get it. I understand that. But it looks amazing on paper when you decide to say, I will recuse myself and let other people vote on that. And you're going to be above board and above reproach as well. No one can accuse you of saying, I set my own salary.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons I encourage pastors. A lot of times they're focusing on growing their church and launching their church, but you got to learn to lead your church.
Yeah.
And when you're inviting board members to be a part of your leadership is educating people. Here's what it means to be on the board. Here's what your responsibilities are. Here's what actions may need to happen throughout the year. Like I notice a lot of people, they invite just somebody they respect to the board, but there's it. Well, you just joined the board. There's no sense of here's what's responsible or here's what I'm really expecting from you. I know you've talked before about an invitation letter.
That's right.
To that. I see that happen a lot, that they need some sort of education on the front end.
Yeah, and I like to show or document evidence that we actually have a process for someone to join the board. So we always begin with an invitation letter, and then we wait for a positive response. That they say, yes, I accept. Once they accept the invitation, then we actually add it to the minutes of the board meeting to say we're going to vote on whether this person will become a board member or not. And once they are voted in, the very first document we give them is the conflict of interest policy.
Right.
They sign it saying that if at any time while we are running this church and I'm a board member, any topic that we vote on comes up in which there could be a conflict or a potential conflict of interest, I will make it known and I will recuse myself. And that is great protection for the board member himself or herself. And, we have to be willing to allow certain restraints. Proverbs says, where there is no restraint, the people will lose vision and they will really everyone will go their own way. And we want certain restraints for our own protection.
And it helps you as a pastor. If I'm out there I'm a pastor and I'm inviting people onto the board, I'm assuming that they have a good motive. You start putting that conflict of interest out there, you start clarifying, you get people that really do want to serve the church. Some people want to get on a board and they want to, this is my place to exert a little power, I can start leading this thing. When you start educating on the front end, time commitments, responsibilities, conflict of interest, some of those sort of things, you kind of weed out people that may not have the best intentions. And you don't know that until you start putting in the boundaries.
One of the greatest pleasures I have when I serve on the board is to be able to make decisions, help decisions be made in which I know that I have absolutely no benefit from myself, but that it builds the kingdom. And I have served on amazing and wonderful organizations that have done great work. And I don't really care to benefit from it because I know that there's a reward in heaven that waits for me for my investment in time into helping this church get started or helping a church grow or helping a nonprofit meet its mission. That to me is very, very satisfying.
How long do you like to sit on a board? I've got different thoughts. Typically, boards I've sat on with a church, I'm typically spending about 3 to 5 years. When I'm with a nonprofit, I was just on a board for a dental organization that started a nonprofit and then I stayed on that board for about a year, get them started, move on. Where do you stand on your different
I'm
nights?
a big fan that 1 year is not enough. I'd say try to serve for at least 2 years. And the bylaws of the church will govern when terms expire. And I usually recommend that a term be no less than 2 years, but 3 to 5 years is fantastic. The church that we started in Florida 27 years ago, that's still there today, we have one of the elders has been there for 27 years.
That's amazing.
And every time his term expires, it goes back for the board to vote And he is always invited back because I have never met a more unselfish and faithful man.
great.
And, so
What a gift.
we say, would you help serve for a couple years? And 27 years later, he's still serving.
Yeah.
That to me is fantastic.
That's awesome.
Lead your board with confidence with the Minute Suite. The Minute Suite walks you step by step through the creation of board meeting minutes that are perfectly formatted to meet state and federal law. Board meeting minute creation, notification, and storage have never been easier. Use the Minute Suite to create the board meeting minutes you need. Visit www.startchurch.com/products and select the Minute Suite to learn more.
So people are listening to this right now or watching this and they're thinking, I need to add somebody. Maybe they've found out about Balanced Board.
Yeah.
Here it's like, oh my gosh, it's me and my wife and my brother-in-law. Or they're saying, so I need to add some, or I might need to remove some. Talk to us about what the strategies you would put in place. Here's how I go about either adding or releasing a board member.
It's a lot easier to add a board member than it is to remove a board member,
God.
especially, that's
true.
right, especially when you have to remove a board member, not because they are resigning or their term is up and they're saying, hey, if you could find someone else, but they actually want to remain, but yet it's not working and it's maybe they're slightly divisive or very divisive. And it's
Or
really,
misalignment of vision. Don't you
That's
think
right.
sometimes you
Misalignment
get on a
of vision,
board,
that's right.
you get all the information on the front end, you get going on, you realize, oh, they're actually going a little different direction than I had thought in the beginning, and I'm misaligned.
Yeah, and that's not easy, because your bylaws will dictate how that happens, and it's got to be done according to the bylaws because removing a board member is not a doctrinal issue.
Right.
It's a legal issue.
Right.
And, the courts will hear a case in the removal of a board member if it's done in such a way that there's no interpretation of church doctrine.
Right.
And usually courts are very willing to hear cases like this. And so removing a board member has to be according to the bylaw. So that's step number one. But I've discovered removing a board member that doesn't want to be removed, it's much better done through your influence as the senior pastor, where you have lots of conversations and you encourage the person, in such a way that they themselves realize, maybe I should move on.
Yeah.
But in the absence of your influence working, then you got to follow the steps. And the way it's done, in most bylaws that I see, is that a procedure is done in which a board meeting is called, in which, of course, minutes are taken, and one of the agenda items is removal of such board member.
So there's previous notice ahead of
That's
time.
right.
Yeah.
That person gets previous notice of the board meeting. They get a chance to attend. And then once they attend, of course, what's the very first thing we do is take roll, and we make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to say, my attendance at this board meeting is legal because I did get due notice. And then you vote on it.
Right.
But before you vote, if you're the senior pastor, if you're the chairman of the board, you should already have spoken to all the other board members to make sure you have the required number of votes. And
We call that the meeting before the meeting, right?
meeting
Making
before
sure
the
I'm
meeting.
pastoring,
That's
I'm
right.
leading before the clock
That's right.
starts.
You don't want to start a meeting not knowing what the outcome's going to be in this because it's uncomfortable.
Sure.
And it's difficult, and the goal is not to win. The goal is how can we separate and still value the person and do it according to kingdom principles.
Sure.
I think this is, you mentioned bylaws there. It's got to be done according to the bylaws. I know so many church planners, they're so busy, pastors so busy, that sometimes they never even read their bylaws.
Yeah.
But it's in these situations where you need to invest the time.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting on a board, I want to make sure that the pastor knows the procedural realities that their bylaws are dictating, so that we as a board, and I think it's important for the board members, to understand how the board is supposed to flow in conjunction with the bylaws.
Well, next to Scripture, the bylaws is your next most important document. The Bible is number one, bylaws are number two. And I do come across a lot of pastors that when I ask them about their bylaws and say, what do they say? And they'll say, I don't know, I haven't read them in so long, or I actually never read them.
Yeah.
But that's really important because a lot of churches are actually doing a lot of things that are contrary to what the bylaws say, and the reason they haven't had trouble is that no one's looked either.
Right.
But you get some divisive people who are more interested in bringing harm to the church, And all they have to do is look at your bylaws and point out all the inconsistencies. So it's super important that bylaws be followed and understood. But what I've also noticed is that nearly every single lawsuit that occurs in a church is resolved by the court looking at the bylaws.
Right, so look at it ahead of time, right?
Get your legal foundation in compliance today with the Get Right program. This program will provide you with a complete step-by-step guide to update your governing documents and secure your legal foundation. It's time to protect what God has called you to lead by getting right today. Give us a call at 844-641-5718. That's 844-641-5718 to learn more about how we can serve you.
So maybe some calls to action here as we're finishing this podcast is that, one, pastors, look at your bylaws.
Yeah.
See how conflict is supposed to be handled, terms of board members, what's their responsibilities. Maybe even give that to your board members, educate them.
That's right.
If you're going to add or remove somebody, go through the procedures, adding, making sure people understand what they're signing up to, what they're saying yes for.
That's good.
Talking about balance, look at your board. Maybe some of you right now, you need to take a look at your board and say, is this balanced? Do I have this set up correctly?
Yeah.
And then begin to lead your board forward this year.
Yeah, and it's also important to realize that a good review of your bylaws would be important, because you may not have things in your bylaws that should be in there.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things in your bylaws that must be in there. There are a lot of things that should be in there. And a lot of times you'll discover that some of the musts are missing and many of the shoulds are not there as well.
That's right.
And that's why, we offer that Get Right program.
That's right.
It allows churches to review their own bylaws, and the whole program walks you through the process of adding the things that are recommended through the program, but you get to choose what you want in there. And at least it's good to know that your bylaws are where they need to be.
Want a strong board? Have strong bylaws.
That's right.
Hey, in our next podcast, let's talk about board meetings, how they flow, and how pastors can be prepared to lead those.
Great. Look forward to it.